Nice. Thank you so much for everybody joining us out. Netherlands. Wow, it must be late for you guys there. India. Oh, even later. So we got like five, six countries already. Great. I see a lot of people joining in, so I'm going to start. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us live, or if you're watching a recording of this afterwards as well. In this webinar, I'm excited to share REPAY's journey from basic optimization to advanced usage optimization as code, especially using Stacklet. Before I go into detail, I wanted to take a minute for Van to introduce himself, and I wanted to thank him as well for his time.
Thank you, Mark. This is Van Wolf. I'm the VP of Platform Engineering for REPAY. I've been in IT for about 30 years. I've been in almost every industry, so fintech, HR tech, healthcare, is the full gamut. And one of the things that's common across all of those industries is the cloud. And I've seen this journey. I've been an Amazon customer since 2012. We were one of the very first EDP customers at the time. So I don't know if anybody's worked with the enterprise discount program, but we were one of the very first customers. So I've been in the cloud and on the cloud journey, especially when it comes to cloud cost management for quite some time.
Great, thank you. And you have to tell us a bit about your hobbies too.
Oh my gosh, I have too many hobbies. So I'm an amateur astronomer. And I'm very into astrophotography, probably because it's very hard, especially here in Denver, which, the light pollution here is very high. I'm also a ham radio operator. So when I'm not working on the cloud architecture optimization, I'm outside either with a radio or a telescope.
Very exciting. So there are a lot of commonalities between watching stars and watching cloud costs, I guess. We can talk about it a bit more in a little. But before we start, if you want to move to the next slide, I did want to, a lot of folks on this webinar might be aware of Stacklet already, but I just wanted to set the context up straight. Stacklet, because we'll be mentioning Stacklet a lot in this webinar, Stacklet basically is powered by Cloud Custodian. It's the same core creative team that created Cloud Custodian, and we contribute and maintain the open source project as well. It's being widely adopted by a lot of organizations out there. If a lot of folks on this webinar are using it, please mention that as well. It's an open source tool, part of the CNCF Foundation. What Stacklet does at its core is we really help you eliminate your governance debt and be well managed in the cloud, right? By governance, it could be cost optimization opportunities, security, compliance, operational stuff, all through a single tool. And what's really unique about Stacklet is it's really great at automating different processes around usage optimization particularly, and allowing you to communicate and take action, right? So we are more focused in really operationalizing findings, be it security or be it cost or be it operationals, and helping you fix those things, and then of course preventing them from happening again, right? Everybody did spring cleaning probably in the last month or so, and you have to do it every time, but with Stacklet in place, you don't have to do spring cleaning every time. With that, I'll pass it over to Van on the next slide. If Van, you want to tell us a bit about REPAY for those that don't know about REPAY as a company?
Sure. REPAY at the core is a payment processor. We do over $25 billion in card volume annually. Our real goal for our customers is to simplify the journey, to make it easier to make payments or take payments, really to make sure that all of the security, the optimization, all of those things that are part of the life cycle of a payment, the customer doesn't have to manage, right? We do that for them on their behalf. And we manage the full life cycle from taking the credit card to clearing on the back end. So I don't think any other company in our industry has the scope end to end that REPAY has. It's an amazing company.
Okay, so let's start with why change. Why go with a tool like Stacklet in the first place?
Well, I can tell you just from our perspective. Go ahead.
I think the slide did not change. I don't know.
Sorry. There you go. Yeah, I was going to give you our perspective quickly, Umar, because you touched on the Cloud Custodian. We did use Cloud Custodian in REPAY. I actually used it in my last company as well. Stacklet automates a lot of the things that you have to do manually in Cloud Custodian, right? It's just a lot more work. And the Stacklet team, from a partnership perspective, really leaned in with us to help get us to our goals. And we'll talk about that in more detail, but definitely from a investment of time and how much work you put into making these tools operate the way you expect them to, Stacklet definitely puts you in a much better place for success in terms of time invested. Go ahead.
Yeah, now tell us about how your challenges grow more and more as your cloud grew as well.
Well, when you think about best practices from a cloud perspective, we separate everything. Again, we're a fintech, so all of our accounts, all of our lower environments, our PCI secure environments, everything has to be separated. And when you separate all those different environments, it starts to fragment your implementation. And if you think about it, we deal with a lot of different verticals, and each one of those verticals, I think there's 21 of them in the previous slide. Each one of those verticals has a different product set, right? It's a different customer. And so when you think about cloud governance and you think about the sprawl of accounts and environments and VPCs, and then the teams deploying, it becomes really, really difficult to manage it all in one place. And it makes it difficult to enforce policies on teams so that they don't make a mistake that costs the company money. So from our perspective, we needed that tool. We needed that governance. We needed a way to control our cost, but also a way to understand it, right? Like, what's the big picture? What are, if you have hundreds of Amazon accounts, how do you manage that, or more, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And how do you connect automation as well, right? You mentioned something about automating your workflows at scale. As you grow in the cloud, it becomes more important. And how do you augment with native tools?
So today we've got Stacklet as code, right? And so all of our policies, everything is in a repo. We don't today fully automate preventing someone from turning something on, right? So we have it in kind of a watch mode. So the automation today, from just preventing users from making mistakes, is in a watch mode. We are implementing the block mode here very shortly. But from an automation perspective, tagging, so we had a product that we were turning up that was dependent on tagging. I think everybody has the same problem with tagging, right? Like, teams have difficulty even agreeing on what the tagging should look like. Do we put the project code in the tags? Do we put the team in the tags? Stacklet automated all of that for us. So we do have automated tagging policies. So when things, and when we deploy a new instance, if it's not tagged, it gets tagged, and it gets tagged according to the policy for that account and that product. And then the tools that we were rolling out that were dependent on the tags now consume those tags and operate it normally. I think that right there, that was one of the very, very first use cases for Stacklet, was like, how do we clean up the tagging? Because everything, as you get into, whether it's, if you're in a map agreement with Amazon and you have to tag for map, or you want to do chargebacks between departments, you have to tag. And that's an owner's task. And you want it to be programmatic. You don't want something where someone's click opsing tags. You want that to be an automated process. And Stacklet does a beautiful job of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there was a question around automating workflow. So Stacklet basically automates all aspects. So from detections of misconfigurations or cost optimization opportunities, you can notify, like Van mentioned, so they're in notification mode. Typically, you start with notification. You can take actions on a resource as well, or you can build a workflow of some sort. Let's say you have a couple of week workflow where you're notifying, then you open Jira tickets, then you're eventually taking an action. So any workflow that your organization wants to build, Stacklet gives you that flexibility. And in REPAY's case, like they started, he's saying, with automating, cleaning up existing stuff, and now they're in prevention mode, so they don't have to do spring cleaning all the time. And if you go to the next slide, I think, Van, you had some numbers and a story to tell us around why blocking is so important, and why, even something that goes in the cloud for a few days can be very costly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And we've had situations where, a lot of this, when you talk about the developer teams, and this is any engineering team, right? They're reading documentation, they're deploying things. We've had teams deploy very, very large implementations of like Elasticsearch, right? And Elasticsearch can be really expensive. And the developers or the engineers don't necessarily understand the cost. And this is where Stacklet comes into play, right? Whether it's a large implementation of an Amazon service that the team doesn't understand in terms of cost ramifications. And that could be, especially today with Gen AI, if anybody's out there using like SageMaker costs can explode, right? And so this gives us the ability to say, let's put a cap on this. Let's get an alert out, and then, let's block it or come in and delete that resource because it violates the policy. And these numbers here, I mean, again, from a monthly cost perspective, I mean, these mistakes aren't like a couple $100 typically. And it's not specific to REPAY. I've worked at other companies where, somebody ran a load test with 200 EC2 instances and left it running over the weekend, right? Like, these are things that cost money that you need to know right away. It's not when you get the bill, it's what's happening right now and how do we create a policy to stop that without humans intervening.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, if you let's talk about the existing tool sets that you have already. If you go to the next slide,
sure.
What were some of the limitations of them?
I think everybody does reporting, and reporting is great for CFOs and the finance team, right? This is more action. So when you think about the difference between Stacklet and some of the other just like cloud cost management tools, Stacklet is an executor, right? It'll execute. You can take the data and actually act on it. You can automate the actions. And so I think that really is the differentiator. We've got a lot of different tools that can tell us kind of basic cost management, but they can't do anything about it, right? They can tell you, and then we've got to have a team, and we've got to get on with that engineering team and say, hey guys, you need to turn this lower environment down. It's costing too much money. Or, hey, maybe you don't need HA, multi-AZ for every single one of your lower environments. Let's turn those down. We can have Stacklet take action. So I think that's really the differentiator, in my opinion.
Great. And if you could share some of the cost optimization opportunities that Stacklet found. I think in the next slide, you listed a few.
Sure.
And folks, we're making it more conversation oriented, so it's more interesting for you. But if you have any slides, let us know. Any questions, let us know. So here you talk, sum it up with Stacklet.
Yep.
Like why you picked Stacklet.
Yeah, no, I think this is kind of a culmination of all the things that we've already covered, right? We've got visibility across multiple accounts, teams. Again, if you guys are involved in any kind of acquisitions and you inherit another company and their Amazon account, this gives you intelligence into those accounts, the ability to look at risks, to set up governance, to make sure that the teams can't make the changes or deploy instances or instance types, or create security groups that are open. I mean, there's a myriad of things that you can do here that I think expands beyond just cost management. And really, from our perspective, it was governance, right? Like, we need to take control, and not just the cost, but end to end take control. And we can't, as an infrastructure and engineering team, we needed to make sure that there was one team that was really like responsible for these aspects of our implementation. And again, it's a single tool, which, one-stop shop is great. It has other, we're going to talk about this in just a little bit, but it has an asset DB that's extremely useful. So yeah, we're very happy with the tool.
Great. Yep. And if you can give us some examples as well. I believe they're on the next slide.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, again, this is right in line with what we talked about. I mean, we had Elasticsearch, we've had logging. CloudTrail logging can get out of control too, especially with some third-party apps that actually will log like entire queries into CloudTrail. So this is where we were able to right-size instances. We were able to identify things that shouldn't be running, look at API message rates and CloudTrail, CloudWatch log ingestion, and make some decisions on what do we need and what can we turn off, and where are the opportunities to really cut the costs back?
Yeah, and here I really want to reiterate as well, like what other folks tell us about, Stacklet as well and cloud custodian journey. Because of this open source community we have, and a very asset database that supports a lot of resources, the depth and breadth of coverage we have for resource types like SageMaker, Van mentioned, and then AWS Workspace. Like typically other tools start with the basic like EC2, RDS, and a bunch of others. Because of our open source community and heritage, people are continuously feeding in new matrices, new filters, new actions, new resource types. And really, Stacklet is not only about fixing things, but also finding the most opportunities for you as well in terms of cost optimization opportunities, especially as you start to grow within the organizations as well.
Yeah, and Workspaces is a really good example that we did use the tool for Workspaces. Our Workspace bill was increasing, especially with outsourced developers, where we needed to make sure that they had REPAY issued instances. It didn't necessarily have to be a laptop, but they couldn't get into our network without a workspace. And when you start to roll workspaces out globally, it gets really expensive quickly. And Stacklet was a great partner in helping us control that cost.
Great, thank you. And I think if you go on the next one, right? I think you talked about preventing costs, right? The blocking capabilities of Stacklet. And then a bit, you can apply the same concept to risk as well, right? So if you can highlight some of those capabilities that you have seen, experienced.
Absolutely. Yep. And I think this also, some of these we touched on, and I think the risk is really important. We have an InfoSec team. I think every company does. And our InfoSec team needs a lot of information. And a lot of that information is like, let me see all the security groups across, 200 plus Amazon accounts. Let me see all of the RDS instances. Do they have database encryption? So, doing that from the command line, doing it from a console is tedious. And with Stacklet's Asset DB, we can just run a SQL query against the inventory and really give that to this InfoSec team to self-serve. So I think, and we'll talk about this probably in another slide, but when you think about the cost, we don't call it cost savings at REPAY, we call it cost avoidance. So we're looking at it like we don't want to spend the money. We're not saving it, we're just avoiding the cost. And so if we can prevent a developer or an engineer or someone in infra from inadvertently deploying an instance that was larger than they expected, or turning on logging that becomes more expensive than we expected, and we have the ability to automatically disable that, turn it off, and notify the user, I mean, that's where we have the cost avoidance. And then from a risk perspective, anything that the InfoSec team can self-serve, they can create policies. And so like some of the policies that we're looking at, if somebody deploys an instance, we want to make sure it has certain characteristics, certain security profile, and now we can enforce that. So it's not just, hey, we did a code review and the Terraform said it was good. We can actually enforce that, like, hey, if it's not, it's coming out of the network.
Sorry, my bad, I was mute. And I think one of the other things that we touched upon, and especially, a lot of people are talking about FinOps X and FinOps, like this concept of unit economics, right? Like tying in, not only talk about cost savings, but the concept that fundamental that it's okay to have an increase in cloud costs as long as the marginal benefit to business grows, right? And Stacklet helps you tie that as well. I think you had a sample chart in the next slide as well for that. I know we took out some of the numbers because of privacy reasons, but do tell us how are you using that?
Absolutely. This is another interesting project that we have with the Stacklet team, and really it's how do you know? I think a lot of companies will just bake in the Amazon bills or an Amazon account for, hey, this is product X, but are we efficient? What is our cost per transaction? How much does it really cost to make a payment, right? And what's our margin on the Amazon side, and how can we improve that? And also, how does the product scale in terms of cost to capacity? And so we worked with the Stacklet team to look at, for a given product, what is the cost per transaction for that product in terms of Amazon spend? And so some of this is like, let's take the number of transactions and let's compare that to the cost per hour, and let's derive some basic benchmark of the cost per transaction. And sometimes, like at night, where there's lower transactions but the hourly cost is the same, your margins may be backwards, but during the day you catch back up and your margins are very, very good. And so this is something that we're working on. It's still, again, I think unit economics is relatively new. It's something that we're striving to get to because we want to bake this into our pricing model, right? We want to know how much this costs per transaction. And then as we add more features and functionalities, how much do those features cost, and back that back into the pricing model. So this goes beyond cost management and more, what is my cost profile for the product? So outside of IT or infrastructure, where you're talking to your CFO and you're budgeting annually for, this is what my Amazon bill is going to be, we really want to get down to per product. What should the cost be, and how do we engineer the product to work within those parameters? And Stacklet has the capability to give that data, or to provide that data.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we've seen a lot of especially in the FinOps community, and some of those folks are on this call as well, really, up leveling, going beyond than basics of billing data and tying into, business value as well, especially, if you tie actions as well, like, eventually tying the value of Stacklet actions or the FinOps teams, the work that are doing generally, tying it to business value is a lot of valuable for the discipline of FinOps itself, which typically, people think of it as cost savings only, right? But it's much more beyond than that.
Yeah.
And I think we covered tagging a bit, but in the next slide, if you can just wrap up, what did you like about Stacklet's capability to automate tagging, and how did you and your team go about doing it?
Yeah, I think we did cover this briefly. Again, we had some tooling that we had implemented, and it was dependent on tags, and it wouldn't operate in an effective way that we could get actionable data out of the tool without appropriate tags being set up for every asset, right? And so we used Stacklet to automate that. So from an automation perspective, that's probably the biggest automation we have today is just the automated tagging. I mean, that just makes life so much easier, not just for the tool that we implemented, but just in general, right? Now we have another level of reporting capability that we didn't have previously. And as I said before, I think we had started to try to do this with the cloud custodian, but it was just a much heavier lift. And with Stacklet, it was, I think we got that done in really short order. I don't remember the exact timing, but I think it was less than a week.
Oh, great. And what's funny is that about tagging, and that you mentioned that there are other tools who do, cloud stuff, but they can't work without tagging, right? So it's like Stacklet becomes a prereq, or a tool like Stacklet becomes a prereq to even operating those tools as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can't depend on the other teams to do it, right? Like that's really and I'm sure that the people on this call have, a diverse set of engineering teams that they work with and product teams, and they all seem to do things a little bit differently. So to have a tool that just unifies it, standardizes the tagging is super important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there are some teams here that are security oriented too. So I did have some security content, like especially the AMI stuff that you guys have been doing.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And, you can just highlight that for a little bit.
Yep.
It should be on the next slide.
Yep. So another, this just goes back to patching. So we produce golden AMIs. Those golden AMIs are hardened, patched instances of operating systems, right? So nothing proprietary there. It's just, we want to make sure that when the development teams release a new version of whatever the software is, they're picking up the latest version of the operating system with all the patches associated with it. And that runs through all the different environments, and it's just part of the release lifecycle. That being said, we have the ability in Stacklet to not only tag those, but also look at the age, right, of those instances and make sure that, from a PCI compliance perspective, that those instances are being updated and that they're picking up the latest golden AMI on a regular cadence. And so we have reporting capabilities and tagging capabilities in Stacklet that make sure that for at least our InfoSec team and infrastructure teams, we can keep an eye on all the other groups so that they are releasing those new images on a regular cadence. That's super important. The reporting capability is great. Tagging plus reporting is just incredible. And it gives us that visibility that we didn't have. And again, this is, we're talking about a very complex, diverse set of Amazon accounts and teams, product types. And so to be able to have that in a single pane of glass is really important.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think picking up speed a bit, I did have a slide on AssetDB just because you love AssetDB that much about Stacklet. So, this is your time. Tell all these people in this webinar why you love AssetDB.
Yeah, and it's funny. When we were talking before the webinar, this is probably only because it saves me so much time. And, you guys, from a time perspective, you probably understand that when someone asks you for, I need a list of all the MySQL instances or SQL Server or Postgres Server instances, I want to know, the version, I want to know, is the disk encrypted? I want to know the security groups. That can be an owner's task, but we can give our security team access to the AccessDB and they can just write a SQL query to get that data. And so it goes back to the self-serve model, right? Where we have the data all in one place. If there's any kind of questions, we can get that data quickly out of the AssetDB. And it's not just security, it's cost, it's, standards. Are we all following the same standards? Where do we need to improve in terms of like getting teams on the same version of X software? The reporting capabilities there. And again, especially if you have a very complicated, multi-Amazon account, multi-environment configuration, this just brings it all together into one place. And instead of like trying to figure out, well, what account is that EC2 instance in? I only have the private IP. I can just go and look for all the EC2 instances with this private IP across all the Amazon accounts, and I have it instantly. So it's a huge time saver for me and my team as well.
Yeah, pretty much a lot of our customers love AssetDB. Everybody loves it, and they all say it's the best surprise that Stacklet has, the best hidden jewel that Stacklet has as well. Similarly, especially if it's platform teams like you have to serve security teams, you have to serve FinOps teams, finance teams. FinOps teams themselves can share cost data to engineering teams as well pretty easily, and they can write their own queries. I know one of our FinOps directors really loves it because he can share it directly with their development teams, and they can get access to data the way they want it to.
Right.
As well.
And you can do the dashboards. The dashboards are incredible too. In fact, when I was talking about the golden AMI or the patched AMI report, that's all in the reporting section here with dashboards. So really, really powerful tool. It's one of those, like you said, it's a hidden gem because it wasn't, when we were looking at the tool initially, it was all cost management and governance. But then to have that reporting capability and to have the reporting capability where, we could bring in other data sources. It's not specific to Amazon or Azure for that matter, because we have Azure data in there as well. It was a huge win.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to wrap it up, right? If you wanted to say any on the next slide, I guess it's a placeholder of all the benefits that Stacklet's helped you achieved. Anything you want to close in on? Any closing remarks? Something that you did not mention about Stacklet? We talked about tagging compliance, all the advanced cost optimization, usage optimization things you have done, the reporting time that have been slashed, security benefits that you've started to see as well, and unlocking broader insights than just cost, right? Connecting cost data, risk data to business as well.
Yeah, I think that sums it up really, really well, Omar. I definitely, when we're talking about tools and someone says, hey, we want a tool to do, X. In a lot of cases, we'll say, well, Stacklet can do that. So when you're looking at like cloud security posture management, there's definitely places that Stacklet can cover you, and you wouldn't need another tool. Certainly cost savings. Risk is huge, but even more importantly, it's an executor. So from my perspective, the fact that it can actually do the work takes the work off of my team, and that pays for itself.
Yep. No, great. Thank you so much. If I know there were a lot of questions being asked, I did try to answer all of them as we went along. If there are any other questions, please put them in the chat. I think for me, the biggest learning from this was, the blocking piece as well, like how important blocking is, how costly, if you don't block the right things, could be, both in terms of risk and costs as well. And a lot of times when, even we, our prospects, our customers are building a use case for Stacklet, we always talk about, hey, how much Stacklet can save you now, right? Because we can help you take action and realize those opportunities, show you a lot of opportunities. But at the same time, like the things that you can prevent and block from happening, it's all the money that you're saving as well.
Yeah, and you can't, and from an Amazon perspective, and this goes for Azure as well, if you have a mistake that costs X dollars, in some cases they will give you a credit, but they're getting very specific about those credits, and they're saying, well, this credit is only for this service, and it's only for costs going forward. And that doesn't necessarily make you whole if you had a mistake where, you spent more than you expected in a given service, 3 months ago or a month ago.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Cool. So I think at this time I wanted to keep it 30 minutes, so pretty close. Pretty much everybody hung on. So I'm hopeful that the content was useful for everybody, especially hearing from an end user, how Stacklet help REPAY as well. So thank you so much for attending, everybody. I hope you found the content useful. If you have any questions about Stacklet, please feel free to request a demo on stacklet.io. With that, and once again, thank you so much, Van, for your time and all the insights that you shared as well.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.